So we've been hearing a lot about AI and generative AI, and it really kind of came into the public, sort of mindset when ChatGPT kind of came out November 2022. Created a lot of energy in the space, I would say, but has it been helpful? Has it been useful? Has it created more of a distraction, or has it, really kind of given what you're doing some momentum and some power?
I'll take it. Hey guys, I'm Shelby. I'm CEO of Arteria AI, a fintech. We work with large financial institutions around the world. In terms of what happened with ChatGPT, I mean, how cool is that everyone in the world got excited about what we do? And for those of us who have worked in the space for, more than a decade, it was a really amazing thing that the entire world came to our doorstep. Every investor wanted to know about our startup. Every major company wanted to meet with us and hear our perspective because we've been doing generative AI amongst other parts of AI for a long time. As a result, it was incredible to get everyone convened, but then can also be a little bit confusing. So I think the problem with what's happened is that there's so much hype that nobody really knows how to get from those legacy systems and get to something real and tangible. And I'm not sure that the hype has really helped. And so, while I will say that it's an amazing catalyst to have everyone's attention, for me, I look forward to when we see generative AI sort of take a little bit of a dial down, which I expect in kind of the next 18 or 24 months, because then I think we can get back to work having had more believers at the table.
I can take it up too. I'm not sure my mic is working. Yeah. Oh, now it's working. Hi everyone, I'm Yannick Lallement. I'm the Chief AI Officer for Scotiabank. I think to answer your question, Kris, it has been useful. It has been useful particularly as Shelby mentioned, to attract attention on AI and what it can do, not just Gen AI. But I think Gen AI itself is starting to be useful. We are starting to see some applications. We will dive into it later. An interesting study by BCG and Harvard University, I think it was about a year ago. They actually did a control study with literally hundreds of consultants, some with ChatGPT, some without ChatGPT, and they actually measured the quality of the outcomes. And there's a bit of, there's more details to it, but in many situations, ChatGPT, Gen AI actually increased the quality of the output. So we are starting to see that at the bank at least.
So it's not all hype.
No.
There's also some results.
There's a lot
also,
of hype,
probably kids' homework has improved sort of over that period as well.
Yep.
I might have actually helped my son with his homework using ChatGPT. I'll wait for the Are we on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I mean, all of the above, I guess, in terms of helping and not helping. What I'll say is it's forced line of business leaders, the C-suite, or people outside of the developer and data science community to actually learn about AI. And I think that's infinitely valuable because obviously this is a new technology and we're all learning how to leverage it in the best way we can. Along those lines, I think it did become a little bit of a distraction to Shelby's point in that there was so much pressure from boards and leadership to just get me something that uses ChatGPT that everybody just found something that it could be applied towards. And when we host leadership at our executive briefing center, and sorry, I'm Kevin Levitt with NVIDIA. I'm on the financial services team. The main way that we shift their perspective about how to think about the technology is it's not about the easiest problem to solve. It's about what's the most pertinent problem that relates to driving a great outcome for your business, and how can generative AI support you in that journey? And we do that ourselves. We created a GPT that helps us design the next evolution in our chip architecture, right? So I encourage all of you to think about the larger problems that this technology can help you solve and to focus your team's energies in working towards that outcome.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mara from Freshbooks. I think there, I agree with a lot of what's said. I think the focus has been good. However, you do see this just get me something, like people are doing it for the badge as opposed to necessarily for the practical purpose and for the win. What I will say though is, we support, we're at the accounting platform of choice for service-based small business owners. And when we think about that lens and what this has done, call it for the smaller folks in the room, or the smaller companies, it's really helped them. And so I think that there is a world where, when I think about my big company experience, I think for big company it's helpful, it focuses attention, can be a bit of distraction, but I think about what it's actually doing for our small business owners and sort of allowing them to play it's been really great. When we look at what's happening within that space, we see, about 25% of our small business owners are using it. Another 2/3 sort of want to start to use it sort of through the period. And so when you think about what that's actually done and being able to get things that only big companies could have normally afforded and being able to drive it sort of downstream, I think there's a bunch of wins there. I think it'll take a little bit of time for people to actually understand how it can be useful and how to make it practical as opposed to just the hype. But, I think when you actually look at this in terms of how are everyday people using it to sort of make themselves more efficient, to reduce their costs, to help them sort of get the next step in their small business journey, we're seeing some really great wins there.
That's great. I think the problem with the hype is that, it has, when people see that level of excitement or hype around something, they just kind of write off the whole space, like, oh, that's hype. And, if you were to sort of, encounter someone like that was, let's call it an AI naysayer, how would you convince them? What example, what sort of win would you highlight that you've seen in reality that you would say, like, this is what this technology can do?
Yeah, for me, I go to what we do. The types of wins we see are that we're able to onboard customers to trade 50% faster than they would have been previously. That's a huge uplift. If you think that on average it can take, 200-300 days to prepare somebody to trade, and we can cut that down by half, that's something really tangible. In addition, when we see huge regulatory penalties coming down the pike in the hundreds of millions, especially south of the border, if we can help assuage those penalties or help with discussions with the regulator around risk and documentation, that's another very, very tangible example. And so what we see is that we're not necessarily talking about how we AI'd it. Though absolutely that's part and parcel of the solution, but really we're going in with tangible points of ROI first, and that's how I would be hopefully convincing, let you be the judge. Go for it.
Yeah, I think there's at Scotiabank we see it as a cake, essentially. There's multiple layers of GenAI that you can enable in your organization. The simplest layer, the first layer, is the chatbots. You have to let people use chatbots, ChatGPT, Copilot, with guidelines, obviously. The second layer is the personal productivity tools like GitHub Copilot for developers. Our developers tell us that they are 10 to 20% more productive with GitHub Copilot. On a software development budget on a company the size of Scotiabank, it's material to actually be able to either save 10 to 20% of your budget or more likely produce 10 to 20% more software. Microsoft 365 Copilot is also very widely rolled out at Scotiabank, and almost all of the users that have been using it say they want to keep using it. And we have been asking everyone for how useful they find it. The average usefulness rate that we got, the star rating, if you want, was 3.9 out of 5. So I don't think that's a Uber-type rating. I think it's a real 3.9 out of 5. It's not perfect, but it's doing interesting things. We also see that different departments at the bank find it differently useful. So the departments that are more focused on, language, text, documents, for example, audit or risk or compliance, they find it super useful. Like their rating is 4.2, 4.3. The departments that deal with numbers, like finance, they find it less useful. Their rating is more like 3.6, 3.7. So it depends on where you look at, but generally speaking, we do find this type of tool useful. And they are pretty cheap to roll out. I mean, the licenses are not cheap, but you really get your value. And then the last layer is really custom tools for specific employees. And we have started working on that. We also work with Arteria, by the way. One tool that we are looking at is how we can use GenAI to enable our equity analysts. And you don't want ChatGPT to write your earning notes, obviously. You do want the equity analyst to put their expertise and their knowledge and their opinion, frankly, in the final result. But the question is, how can GenAI make that process faster? And that's basically always the question with GenAI, right? It's how, in a given process, where can you plug it in to make some steps of the process a bit faster? So for that, we work very closely with our internal client, in this case with the equity research group. And together with data scientists, with prompt engineers, we figure out at which step can the GenAI be useful, and then what tool we need to develop to effectively increase their productivity. So there's multiple layers, and all of them are useful. Of course, the higher you go, the more expensive it tends to be.
So starting to see some real results broadly and then specific use cases.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, we talk about the customer success stories, across every step of the journey for a customer, as Yannick was just describing, kind of the different layers. And, it's not just our customers, but just the industry proactively talking. If you look at what Klarna introduced in terms of the benefits of their chatbot, and being able to handle, the equivalent of what 700 customer service agents would address through their AI-powered chatbot. American Express has talked about when they moved from machine learning to deep learning, they were able to improve fraud detection accuracy and reduce false positives by 6%. And for a company that's been fighting fraud for over 100 years to move not 10 basis points, but 600 in their fraud detection accuracy is a huge win, not just for the bank and the card issuer, but also for the customer at the point of sale and the merchant that's trying to process the transaction. And then it goes to financial enablement and empowerment, using it at the point of underwriting. And the other thing that we point to is just certainly the growth that we've experienced as a business within financial services and the number of use cases that we know the leading banks are operating against. It's no longer 100, it's in the hundreds, if not 1,000. And that's the way we talk about it, and why I love this industry so much when it comes to AI is, it will be thousands of use cases into the future. And if you think about what we do really well as an industry, it's taking data and turning it into insight, right? And that's how we differentiate. It's not because we have a differentiated cashback credit card, and apologies to those of you that think you do, but generally whatever, it's 1% to 2% cashback, maybe a bump on certain categories every quarter. The point is you use data more effectively to underwrite, to service, to manage, whether or not that customer is going to fall off the cliff in terms of their ability to repay, and how you use data and manufacture intelligence, which is kind of the industrial revolution that's now upon us. We're not taking water and turning it into electricity anymore. We've done that. What we're doing is we're taking data and we're manufacturing intelligence through AI factories. And that's where we're focused as an organization in terms of helping the industry move forward.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so again, I agree with a lot of, I think, what's already been said. And when we think about it, there's, we have a lot of the fraud and the underwriting use cases that we're looking at. But we also are doing things like, how do we support our customers to do even just simple things like categorizing their expenses more simply? And so when you take it, there's all these really big opportunities that you have, I think, within the back offices of your organizations. How do you make your employees more efficient? How do you make your results faster? And then I think the next layer is, how do you actually push some of that over to your customers, and where do they see benefit as well? And so I think that when you see how this is working in the industry, different companies are taking different approaches. At Freshbooks, we're doing a little bit of both. We're trying to figure out how do we empower our business owners, but also how do we leverage it to make ourselves more efficiently internally? And there's so many ways that we can do it. And again, there's the hype. We're talking a lot right now about Gen AI, but that's one small branch of, I think, the bigger piece. And when we talk about the hype, I think Gen AI has made it come to life, but I actually think when you really look under the hood, Gen AI is a very small portion of, I think, the broader scope of AI use cases that I think can support organizations moving forward.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, one of the challenges is that, quality AI needs quality data. And, a lot of people in this room have legacy systems that are old enough to have children or grandchildren. I mean, you know, some of those systems I've seen, you know, that you have to truncate things down to 8 characters. You can't take, you know, a full email address. You can only take a portion. How do you get an AI result, or how do you get, you know, reasonable business context from AI, generative or otherwise, with legacy data? You know, if all you have is legacy data and maybe a myriad of legacy systems, how can you make sense of that?
Yeah, I'll pick up on Mara's last point and tie it to your question, Kris, in terms of, you know, it's not just Gen AI. Like, Gen AI is, you know, a shiny object. I mean, we encourage people, to your point, Kris, around just start with how you're processing your data. Like, if you migrate from traditional compute, and there's $1 trillion worth of CPU infrastructure out there, data is going like this. The computational power of CPUs are going like this. So there's this computational inflation challenge that we're facing as an industry, and not just here in financial services, but around the world. Point accelerated compute at that problem, you're moving so much data, why are you doing it at such a significant cost to your enterprise? Like, again, you don't have to start with generative AI. You can just process your data more effectively so that you can have a single source of truth when it comes to your data integrity and the assets that you're leveraging to power all of the models and opportunities downstream. And again, those models can be machine learning. They don't have to be deep learning, so that, you know, we'll talk about more challenges related to explainability and trustworthiness when it comes to AI. But don't feel like you have to jump to the end. You can start at the beginning and just think about the 3 phases of your workflow, which is data processing or preparation, model training, and then model inference. And how do you leverage these new technologies to assist your developers and data scientists, who are some of your most expensive resources, be as productive as possible? And, you know, that's kind of how we structure the journey for our clients when we're talking about enabling them around AI and our accelerated computing stack.
So you're advocating more of a crawl, walk, run approach. Don't try and jump right into, you know, kind of a marathon. Get some of your basics understood first?
I think it depends on the talent. That's that dictates kind of how you're able to address this opportunity. You know, some people don't have 100 or let alone 1,000 or even a dozen data scientists to build, right? And so you're going to leverage great ecosystem partners. And that was like one of the key words that resonated with me from Governor Murphy's talk, talking about ecosystems driving innovation. And that's my job, is to help build an ecosystem that supports everybody in this audience, so that whether you're a builder or a buyer, you have the opportunity to leverage AI against what are your most pressing business problems. And so I think the talent dictates how and where you start, but data is a big part of it as well. You've got to have the clean data, as well as the proper guardrails and environment set up so that you're not using data you shouldn't be. And there's a whole other talk track there, but I'll stop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, no, please, Mara.
No, I was going to say, I think that's right. And I think that when you know, we talk about AI and you're talking about the systems and legacy systems, it all starts with the data anyway. So the companies who are going to do better are the companies who are farther along on their data journey. And in most of those cases, you've taken the data out of your legacy systems anyways for processing. Exactly what use cases you can do will depend on the speed of your legacy systems to be able to sort of ingest and move it forward. But I think that the legacy system problem and the data problem can be disaggregated as you think about how it is that you're going forward. And, you know, when you think about crawl, walk, run, I think the way to think about that problem is you might have this thing you want to do, and I don't know you, but no CEO I've ever worked with or for is going to say, you know, take a bunch of money and I'll see you in 5 years. And so a lot of that is actually thinking about how do you stage your wins along the way. So if you're trying to get to an end state journey in a couple years, what are the meaningful things that you can develop along the way? And that's actually allows you to work with your legacy systems, I think, as you think through exactly how you want to modernize your stack going forward. But, you know, take each problem that you have and break it down into sort of meaningful chunks that allow you to learn to create value along the way as you're going on your data journey.
I like that. So kind of parallel track, tackle your legacy systems on one track, and, you know, move towards your AI ambitions on another track.
exactly what I was going to say. I've done a bunch of AI transformations. Before going back to fintech land, I ran AI for one of the large consulting firms. And what I will say is I've never seen anyone suffer through the multi-year journey. So while you have to crawl before you run, absolutely, you have to have outcomes and wins along the way. And what that means is maybe choosing smaller things where the data integrity already exists, or maybe choosing something like unstructured data, where the AI transformation is a lot of the digitization processing, so sort of the data cleanup happens as you go. But either way, showing tangible outcomes that are significant enough to the business before trying to get buy-in for a crawling journey, I think is, yes, agreed, violent agreement.
I think the point for me is that, yes, we do have legacy systems. We are also financial institutions, so largely the data is rather clean. There may not be as much data being collected by those legacy systems as we would like to, but the data won't be too messy. And you're not going to run AI on those legacy systems. You're going to run AI on a net new stack, probably on the cloud, not necessarily, but probably. And then the question becomes, how do you upload that data from the legacy systems to the cloud, right? Once you have that, effectively you can run with or you can crawl, walk, run with your AI journey.
Yeah, I think it's a real opportunity for the banks, given the amount of data and the number of customers that they have, to really tap into that. Let's talk a little bit about velocity. I mean, one of the things I've noticed, since November 22, ChatGPT had a moment, and then it seemed like, every week there's a different thing happening. For a week it was all about local models running locally, and then Claude had a moment, and Anthropic. I have to refresh my Twitter feed just to see what's the activity du jour that is kind of the topic in AI. If I'm a large enterprise organization, if I'm an investor, it can be hard to read, where is this space going? How do we make plans in this high velocity environment? How do we make investments in this environment? Or how do we hedge?
I'll give it a go. I think it matters who we are in that ecosystem. So if I'm a CEO, I don't think I should follow what Anthropic or Llama 3 or whatever is doing this week, because I don't think it matters. And I think getting distracted by that shouldn't matter, and you should leave it to your science team to help you sort through the tools and techniques that need to be used to address a problem. I think as leaders, we need to understand and ask the right questions about how this applies to the problems we want to solve. So whether or not that's maximizing revenue or minimizing risk or cost, I think we have to ask questions about how this new tool set, which can include, by the way, what did I read? It's tens of thousands of models, were made this year. The number is staggering, and that was from probably 2 months ago, that stat. So it's probably tens of thousands more at this point. We shouldn't be talking about a single model unless it's particularly relevant for what we're doing. We should be talking as executives, business leaders, and investors, being really thoughtful about how we can apply, and then building confidence in the teams and tools that know what they're doing to get the best result in any given circumstance. Typically what we'll do is we'll use a whole bunch of different layers depending on what use case we're looking at in particular. And so it's not even within our organization we'll use the same technique, brute force every single time. I think we need to be a little bit more nuanced about what we're doing. And so I would say don't try and keep up at that level, and except for interest, and rely on those who you have, like Yannick and others, who will most certainly know the right answer to sort of put to any given problem.
Yeah, Shelby, I completely agree with you. Like any other big decision you make, we don't want to blow with the wind on this one either, right? And so I think it's really important to understand what are the problems you want to solve and how are you prioritizing your ability to do that based on the objectives that you have for your organization. I think understanding what's going on is helpful as you use your imagination to think about the future, about which problems might be easier to solve, which customer problems, where do you think you could go, and maybe that helps you unlock a vision. But, to Shelby's point, you want to stay with what you're doing, focus on the problems that you want to solve, and let your team do the work, right? I think that, again, it's interesting, but a lot of it's hype, and to the extent that you want to just make sure that you're continuing on a path, and frankly, speaking on behalf of probably the teams that are working on it, I think allowing them to focus and do their job and see results is more important than sort of redirecting left, right, and center. And I know that everybody wants the little powered by AI badge on the top of whatever application they're building, and that feels really important right now. I think it's less, it'll hamper success if that's the ultimate goal versus actually focusing on the problems that you can and need to be solving within your organizations.
Yeah, I like that. So find a problem, solve the problem, measure the results, iterate. Don't get distracted in between.
Yeah, I think that as you understand what's happening in the industry, I think it's helpful for sort of building your future vision. What problems could I now think about that I couldn't have solved before? How do those problems become maybe more efficient or more cost effective to solve? But you can't be blowing with the wind every quarter and expect results, in my opinion.
And I'll go back to ecosystem, like leverage us, leverage the cloud service providers, leverage the research that's coming out of the great GSIs and consultancies, but don't feel like you're on an island, so to speak. There are so many great companies that are working to build solutions and solve these problems and help you through that journey. And you already have a good sense of what you can trust, what you can't trust, and so just utilize that filter to evaluate who are the right partners to help you on this journey. And it is not going to happen overnight, and that's totally okay. But I would say one of the things that we pay attention to is which companies are coming out to the West Coast to do the tour, to visit. Like those companies self-select in because their leadership is interested in learning and taking in all this information. And one of the number one questions they ask is, where do we start? And what we've seen is that fraud is a great place to start. Our industry sometimes moves slowly because of regulation, and that's totally okay. Like that really helps us in a lot of cases. But what we've seen is that the regulators are happy for us to find more bad guys and gals, and so utilizing the technology for what ultimately turns out to be a low infrastructure cost solution with a high ROI that we've seen companies make their money back in months, not years, is a great place to start building that momentum and kind of kickstart that journey.
Yeah, I love that. Great.
And maybe one more point on the GenAI journey and how much attention we should pay to the ecosystem. As I see it, the big difference was before ChatGPT and after ChatGPT. Basically, we didn't have GenAI, and then we had GenAI. That's the big difference. What has been happening since has been largely incremental, right? So the details don't really matter too much. Yes, Claude at a moment, but it's just because it was 1% better than GPT-4, right? So the two things to look out for as the next big steps, I think, for GenAI are, one is agentic AI, where where AIs can behave like agents in the real world, or at least in the virtual world, in the internet. They can use tools and they can actually do things on their own. You give them a task, they make a plan, and then they start executing on that plan. That's probably a small number of years away. There's research in universities and demos and so on. It's not really widely available yet, and don't count on it now, but it's coming. The second iteration after agentic AI would be AGI, artificial general intelligence. For this, we don't know when, or we don't even know if it will ever happen, right? So that's not something we can count on. But in the meantime, it's really about incremental progress, really, as I see it.
I was with you on agentic. I wasn't necessarily going to AGI, but I'm like, I think agents are here sooner than we think, too.
So you have it here, folks. AGI is coming, and they're going to be
AGI might be coming.
No, I love that. Let's talk a little bit about costs. Like, I mean, when generative first emerged, the counter narrative was like, oh, that's interesting, but can't really solve any real problems with that. Too expensive. And as a career builder of software, I looked at generative and said, wow, like, there's a whole algorithm there that would have taken me, teams and, rules and, all kinds of technology to build, and yet this generative tool seems to be able to get to the answer, but too expensive, right? So now we've seen in the last year, costs are coming down radically. We see light models coming out. We see other things coming out. How do costs change the game here?
I mean, this is a huge focus for why we're spending the billions of dollars in R&D every year that we do, which is to find ways to bring the costs down, both for model training and for inference. And so if you look at the new architecture that's been introduced this spring in Blackwell, which will be coming out, the price per performance or outcome comes down dramatically. Depending on the workload, it's dozens to hundreds of times more performant than the Hopper architecture. But it's not just about pure cost, it's also about energy consumption. And we have plenty of customers that are very energy constrained or even capped when it comes to their data centers and how they're building out their infrastructure. And so to reduce the energy utilization is a key component of how we bring costs down for the industry. The other thing I'll say is, you don't have to build it yourself. Leverage the CSPs, test in their environment. Come to NVIDIA and access Launchpad, which is free, to experience what acceleration can do for your business and for your data science teams. There are all sorts of ways to navigate through it where you don't have to outlay millions and millions from the get-go. There are tools, and the ecosystem is set up to support all of you to test, learn, and then continue iterating and innovating, and then invest when the time is right for your company.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think a slight different thought, perspective there is I think it's also important as you're looking is, part of the thing with generative AI is that it's, when you think about language, it's universal. And so I think it's also important to understand where can you use sort of things that exist already and where does it really need to be your own data. And if you're smaller, like us, and you're smaller, you don't have, millions and millions of dollars to invest in some of these things. We really spend a lot of energy focusing on where can we use some of the general purpose stuff overall, and then where do we actually want to build our own with our own data. And I think even just playing that out as you think through your use cases and what you want to do is helpful.
I mean, everybody's focused on accuracy, right? And so the off-the-shelf models are great for getting started, but you have a specific business and specific data and specific customers, et cetera, and you want your language models and your generative AI to be able to use that intelligence. And so the analogy that was given to us was, why would I export my data or my flour to buy back bread when I can enrich the data and bake my own bread? And so the idea of taking the insights that really differentiate you, as we talked about earlier, in terms of your data and how you leverage that from an intelligence standpoint, and giving it to another enterprise versus figuring out a way to leverage the open source models and to build more accurate outcomes, because you need to do domain adaptive pre-training, you need to do fine-tuning, you need to leverage a RAG. Like, there's more than just going and outsourcing that ultimately is going to make generative AI work for your proprietary business and the outcomes you're trying to drive.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
In terms of costs, it depends on what costs we are considering and what we are doing, right? If we look at just the inference cost for GenAI, Scotiabank has decided to focus our GenAI efforts on employees first. We have 90,000 employees. That's not going to result in a very meaningful inference budget. We are also starting to look at what it would like to roll out more GenAI customer facing. Across our footprint, we have 25 million customers, so that will change the cost equation a little bit, right? But the inference cost is really not the meaningful part here. It's really the development cost and the change management cost associated to rolling out AI, any kind of AI, really.
Got it. Yeah. We've got a great room here. Maybe we can go out to the audience for some questions. Do we have microphones or anything? Anybody have any questions? Or just feel free to stand up and ask. Maybe as we're getting ready, I've got some additional questions here, but it'd be great to get some questions. Yeah.
We talk a lot about companies using their own data to generate inference and solve problems. How limited is the data that companies possess of their own? And how important is it for them to be access similar data sets or complementary data sets.
Got it. Yeah. So the question is really about, do companies need to augment their own data to get more perspective to be able to use this technology effectively? Yeah, good question.
It's often hard to get augmented data sets depending on what it is. I mean, where there's a utility, you absolutely can augment your data sets. For example, some aspects of fraud, there are certainly holistic bodies where you can access data as a utility, as a whole industry. That's the kind of thinking we'd like to see going forward. More and more, we're starting to see that everyone wants to keep their own data private. We'll also use everyone else's data, so that can be a little bit confusing. I think in time that will change. People will decide where their alpha really comes from. They'll figure out where that competitive advantage is, and then they'll start to see that there's real benefit in sharing. But until we go there, probably the single most asked question I get is, will my data be commingled? Even for the purpose of training, even for the purpose of anything, it needs to be in its own box forever and ever. And so I hope we'll get there. And in some cases, people are willing to provide the use of their data in certain circumstances. But really, particularly in this industry, I think it's a little tougher than most. I don't know if anyone agrees.
I mean, I think it depends on the use case. I mean, I'd say the chatbot is probably the cleanest version of where we use sort of general purpose, and to your point, you augment with, your own specific language. But, as it relates to most of your business problems, they tend to be specific to you. I think to the extent that there's general purpose, when you start to look at AML and other things, there's probably more broad. We also see no one wants to give it up, and everyone wants to hold on to it. And so I think where it's gonna end up is really understanding what makes you special. Where are you able to contribute that's probably not within your competitive advantage, but really what is it that makes your own company tick, and how do you leverage or protect that data as you see fit.
Yeah. And since we're at a fintech forum, I'll mention 3 fintechs that might be able to help. One is contextual AI. Another is security AI, but with an I at the end, not a Y. Another one's Hummingbird. I mean, there's so many companies out there trying to solve this problem, which is, what data can I actually use to power my models, right? And not go outside the bounds of what's been established by regulators. So, again, ecosystem, you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, that's a good one. Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, got one here, I guess, for Mr. Lallement. How do you manage the risk of AI as an agent with the massive amount of confidential data that, for instance, your bank has?
So security, privacy.
I can start. The key word for this is governance, right? You need to be aware of what you are doing step by step when you create a net new model. So we have a process for that. We have policies for that. We risk rate our models. Models that are rated higher risk, of course, require higher level of approvals, that kind of things. It can be done. It's really a question of process and documentation. You need to have that, to have those tied down before you go too fast.
And probably for the whole supply chain of the data that is used to train the model,
Yes,
all the
that's part of it.
inputs and all the outputs as well.
Data
right?
lineage, we need to
Yeah.
understand the data. Data governance is effectively part of AI now, since AI uses that data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense.
There's no silver bullet solution, unfortunately, but I think what Yannick is highlighting is the fact that the entire industry, all of you already do this. You have governance in place for how data is used to underwrite and understand risk, right? So you have the infrastructure already. There's some additional education, I'm sure, that has to happen to those teams, and policies have to be written, et cetera. But this is not unique or something that we have not tackled before.
I thought your example on fraud was particularly relevant. I think that we need to apply different methodologies. I mean, this is what we're seeing around the world, is that there's really a risk-based approach. So if you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, which fraud is often about finding, assuming you know that the needle is what you have in your hand at the end, it's not that risky. You could have done backflips to find that. Like, it doesn't really matter what techniques you use to find that, because as long as you are confident that what you have in your hand is the needle at the end of the day, there's very little risk. Whereas if you're using, AI to solve a medical problem or allocate credit, et cetera, obviously there are deeper concerns there. And so really, I thought your example before was excellent for that, and just really trying to ensure that we're looking at what really is risky and realizing that using discriminatory models to find something, or even generative models to find something, is probably not that risky.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Yeah, so Marie-Chantal Leduc from Tetra Trust here. I have a question. So I'll start with some context. I really like the approach of the ecosystem. I really like also the mention of a single source of truth for the data. Yet, I think that AI is being approached in silo rather than at the ecosystem level and leveraging other technologies. So my question here is really about how do you see organizations in the financial sector currently leveraging blockchain, DLTs, and Web3? Is it even in their vision? Because this can solve some of the issues, and it's really the ecosystem approach here. So.
I'm not a blockchain
What do we
shipper,
see
so
out there?
Not a blockchain person either.
Yeah, I think AI has probably stolen some of the thunder, maybe. But what we're seeing companies invest in and how they're thinking about AI, and sorry not to address distributed ledger technologies directly, but the whole point is it's hundreds of use cases today, thousands in the future. You need to build an AI factory to be able to tackle this opportunity, because every line of business is going to have AI-enabled applications, and you need an infrastructure that scales across the enterprise to help your teams build it productively and at scale. And so thinking about how you build an AI factory is what I would challenge you and your teams to ponder and explore and evaluate ecosystem partners. And part of that hopefully is DLT and Web3, et cetera, because all of those are innovations that are going to have to scale and apply to the right business problem with apply the right tools to the right business problems is where I was going.
I think the most interesting project that maybe you've seen in this space is some sort of mechanism to allow agents to create economic incentives for each other, to do things for each other. I think interesting, but very early days, I would say. So certainly a good question. We have one more question.
Denis Gauthier from Sophistic AI. Good morning. When you deal with clients with multiple institutions, one of the big challenges is data aggregation. It's also a big opportunity. And a sub-question to that is, what is your opinion on open banking? It's been there for years, and it's not really happening. So I'd like to hear you about that.
I can speak to the first one. Just there are techniques like federated learning, where you can obfuscate and anonymize the data and use it. It's not just a problem for across sovereign national lines. It's a problem for across lines of business within a single organization. And so we have a case study with Bank of New York Mellon that utilized federated learning so that they could share data internally that they otherwise wouldn't be able to inform the model creation and the weights associated with the model, so they could be more accurate in their anti-money laundering and KYC efforts. So I would look into federated learning and other techniques. In terms of open banking, does somebody want to talk to that?
I mean, if it can help open banking, if we can get open banking faster with generative AI, I mean, I'll donate my OpenAI API key if it's useful. But I think the point is that if data aggregation helps machine learning and AI, open banking helps safe data aggregation, we should be kind of doubling down and pushing on that. It makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. I know we're out of time, but thank you to my esteemed panelists. This has been great. Thank you for the conversation, and thank you for everybody for coming out.